Hello, students. It's me again. It seems to happen every week. Uh, we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about tax policy and income distribution. And so, as always, I would encourage you to do your readings. I think this week is chapter 9, and to be prepared to have some good conversations when we get together via Zoom. All right, so let's, without any further ado, taxes, 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 taxes. Literally, if you think about just the process of going through your day, taxes always seem to have a way of becoming a part of that. So when you leave the house and go to the grocery store, there are some items that have an extra tax on them and some that don't. When you put gas in your car, um, there's a tax that's built into the gas that you actually use. Um, when you look at your paycheck, for those of you who are working, there's some folks that take money out of your gross income before you get to see it. Federal, state, and others. So Medicare, Medicaid, there are taxes everywhere. If you own property, if you drive a car, you got to pay taxes on the tabs every year. If you're in a house, there's property taxes, 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 taxes. All right, and that's not funny. But why do we need to have these taxes? And why are taxes necessary for social welfare policies? Well, let's talk about that. So first off, taxes are used for these particular reasons here. Um, and taxes have been around long before you or I or our parents or their parents even. And it's been kind of a worldwide phenomenon. And these are some of the reasons that are listed for why taxes actually happen. It's about, the well-being of society. And it's about making sure that we have resources to meet our daily needs and to be successful and to protect each other and educate our people and to provide health care for them. The list goes on and on and on. Basically, social welfare functions that kind of came out of a whole tax-based piece started back in 1935 with the Social Security Act. And it was really designed to address the state of poverty that many folks who had worked for a number of years were starting to experience as they were no longer able to sustain employment due to their age. So that was the beginning, but it has grown immensely since then, and that particular act has been added to on multiple occasions, which kind of gives the basis for our social welfare system that is connected with tax revenue. Right. So you'll also notice that whenever these issues around taxes come up, their disabilities, discrimination, illness, unemployment, poverty, they kind of get into these huge debates. Should we be using tax dollars to deal with these types of things? And so the ideologies enter into the room and it becomes problematic in terms of doing that. Back in the early 80s during the Reagan presidency, um, prior to the 80s, there were social programming were pretty much flourishing and thriving. And people in this country are actually making some forward progress. And then Reagan was elected to office, and there was a huge change that actually has been and still plagues us to this day in terms of conservatives looking at um, scaling back social programs, and doing other things with tax dollars as opposed to taking care of the citizens of our country. So that's kind of the modern day origins of where we are in terms of this environment. And then when we think about income distribution, and we start to look at these different these particular quintiles, you can see that those of us who were doing very, 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 very well, I'm not including myself in that particular category, you're rich, you're wealthy, you're millionaires, you're billionaires, they continue to get richer. And so even with taxes that are, demanded of all folks due to income that they pay on, they're still managing to get richer, and many others of us are actually having the opposite effect. So now, when we think about tax policy and the poor, we've got taxes that generate revenue for a number of different social programs, and there's some that are listed and some that we have talked about and will talk about in some further sessions. But Social Security, cash assistance, temporary assistance for needy family, unearned income credit, those things which are all virtually means tested in terms of folks have to make certain criteria before they're actually eligible for these particular services. So anti-poverty tax is, used to decrease poverty, and in terms of looking at the incomes of poor folks, and it's a new feature in our U.S. social policy. So tax expenditures such as deduction on housing, you know, health care, writing off property taxes have been a benefit for the middle class. So just to know that piece. And then there is a list of tax credits that are available for the poor: IEC, child care, welfare to work programs, care for the elderly disabled, and federal monies for adoptions as well too. So there are some expenditures that have been designated to look at becoming anti-poverty. And so a question to ask, and a lot of times it comes up in election cycles or when we start to just think about generally, our state of existence and being, as well as what's happening with taxes, who pays, who doesn't. This question often comes up. Would increasing refundable tax credits address poverty? Good question. Let's see. And in some respects, it would, because again, it would allow families to kind of move ahead to some degree. And then there's some percentages here in terms of children who are born in that bottom quintile um, with one of the top two income groups. Minority children face this downward mobility, 45% fall below in terms of income distribution, 16% of white children, and with board and with black children being comparatively at 54%. So you can see there's a huge disparity between what happens when incomes are not equitable in terms of taxation. And then right here in our own little Minnesota, we start to look at who makes what. And so there may be a number of different things that we can think about that might be driving some of these particular numbers. Um, you've got various systems that are in play. You've got educational systems, you've got workforce systems, you've got um, potentially discrimination that might be happening in some instances. But you can see that there's a disparity just in the number and the income that annual income, median income, and that's the halfway mark for families. Um, and it has continued to grow as time has kind of gone on, or in some instances for minority families, they've actually shrank and went down. Um, while for families that are white, they've actually went up. So we got to think about what's happening in Minnesota that's kind of generating that. What are the precursors to these types of disparities in income distribution? Also, looking at this particular chart in a little bit much more of an exploded blue, it does matter to everyone, and you know these bullets really just kind of talk about the things that are happening in terms of who's hit the hardest, um, and just what's happening right here in our very own state. And so I think for us as social workers, we need to be aware of these particular things as we are charged with going out and providing services to clients who might fall into any of these particular categories. So to have a sense of what we're addressing as we go there um, in terms of that. There are also newer anti-tax movements. A lot of folks don't believe we should be paying taxes at all, which, um, the Tea Party comes to mind, for example, in terms of less government regulation and their anti-tax. Um, so there is this other piece as well too. So when we look at taxes, it's just a really complicated piece, and it's even more complicated than we have time to even discuss here. But this is some other aspects or venues of the whole tax piece. There's also the ongoing debate around economic equality. You've got um, folks who are saying lower taxes, some folks who are protesting the markets and looking at economic equality and why does this debate exist, and how do we go about leveraging tax policy to advance social justice? I mean, how do we do that as social workers? How do we do that with legislators and with folks who are responsible for dictating policy and helping us determine what that is? So that's just a brief overview of just kind of taxation policy and distribution. In the shell, there are a couple of other videos that I'd like you to take a look at as well. They go into a little bit more depth as it relates to taxes, how they work, the whole 9 yards. It can be a pretty convoluted and challenging process, so I don't expect to have tax scholars coming out of this class. But just to give you an idea how complex it is and how it does play a role in terms of the work that we do as social workers as it affects social justice issues as well as economic equality issues as well too. So thank you, and I will see you soon.